Today's episode of the Cloudcast is sponsored by Datadog. Bring speed and scale to your security organization. Datadog Cloud Security Platform delivers real-time threat detection and continuous configuration audits across applications, hosts, containers, and cloud infrastructure. Built on top of the observability platform, Datadog brings unprecedented integration between security and DevOps aligned to shared organizational goals. As a listener to the Cloudcast, you can sign up for a free 2-week trial to see for yourself how Datadog can elevate your cloud infrastructure security posture by visiting datadog.com/security-cloudcast. Sign up now and receive a free Datadog t-shirt. That's datadog.com/security-cloudcast.
Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening over here, and welcome back to the Cloudcast. We're coming to you live from our massive Cloudcast studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. And as I hit record on this, it is a little after the midpoint in September, and actually have some really interesting news articles this week. And so we are going to jump right in. For our first article, we actually have the folks over at Zoom, and we've talked about them in the news a couple times here. But as something that is probably a surprise to no one, and this is all rumors and speculation, by the way, but Zoom is apparently getting ready to bring to market email and calendar products. And why would they do something like that? Well, of course, they really revolutionized remote conferencing. But how do those get launched? How do they get scheduled? How do you communicate those meetings? Well, you do it through products from Microsoft and Google, who they are trying to attack this space now that they've kind of seen what happens here. And Zoom's a little vulnerable. So it makes sense they would come out with services like this. Internally, they're kind of referred to as Zmail and Zcal. Now, I don't know if they're actually going to go with those names or not. But I also wonder who's actually going to use that. Are organizations going to rip out Gmail or Office 365 to implement something like that? That's going to be the big problem here, because email is extremely sticky. Calendaring apps are extremely sticky. So they certainly have a challenge in front of them, but it will be interesting to see how this turns out. And for our second article, we have Adobe. Adobe kind of made history here. They bought a design startup, Figma. Now, Figma went for $20 billion, and that's the kind of record portion of all of this, because that is the largest acquisition ever of a privately held software company. They did take some funding. They had taken $330 million on a $10 billion valuation, so one heck of an exit for the folks over at Figma. And really what's going on here, though, is they've been in stealth mode for a long time, and their secret sauce was, of course, browser-based tooling specifically for software design. And it was something Adobe wanted to capture and wanted to capture that market, and they potentially see that growing extremely quickly. And for our third and final article this week, John Chambers and the early Cisco folks are back at it again. They have a startup that they brought out of stealth, and it is called Nile. And at first glance, I was like, oh, great, another networking company. And they even are doing hardware. But they actually are bringing some modernization to this. First of all, it's offered as a service. So upgrades of the operating systems and some of the management of them, the licensing of it is per user as well. So very dynamic operations model. And the goal there is simplicity. In addition to that, some upgrades, if you will. Encryption, over-the-wire encryption is certainly something that with cyber attacks and everything going on, that is a feature that is certainly catching everyone's attention. And then there's another one called microseg or microsegmentation. If you're not familiar with microsegmentation, Think of it as firewalling at the port level, if you will, of two desktops can't talk to each other, or maybe an application server that doesn't need to be talking to another application server in a data center. It can't talk to any of those, but it can talk to servers or applications in its own stack. So basically putting an level of intelligence and something that is policy based in the data center. So it is an interesting model. It is an interesting to see where all of this goes and how this as a managed service model will work in a networking world. It is going to be introduced in the United States and Canada to start. And then it's going to, Nile is going to expand availability into additional markets over the next few months. And with that, I'm going to wrap up Cloud News of the Week. Coming up right after the break, we are going to be talking about building ML apps.
Buffering. How annoying. Did you know that 17 out of 20 people stop watching a video because of stalling and rebuffering? Don't let your users click away to a competitor's site. If your business lies in online media, rely on CDN77 to deliver a seamless online experience to your audience. CDN77 is one of the leading global providers of content delivery network services. They power the world's most popular websites and apps, such as Udemy, ESL Gaming, live sports TV, and social media platforms. Aside from their massive and redundant global network, you're going to love their no BS attitude and skilled team of engineers ready to help 24/7. No chatbots, no tickets bouncing around unresolved for days, just people who know your use case and can immediately help you pinpoint and fix the problems. Don't wait until your users run out of patience. Go to cdn77.com/cloudcast and ask for a free trial with no duration or traffic limits. That's cdn77.com/cloudcast. And we're back. And folks, if you've listened to the show for a little while, or even if you're new to the show, it's hard to get away from the thing that is constantly talked about, and we deal with it every day in our lives, which is machine learning, and how so many things that we interact with these days somehow have machine learning behind the scenes. More and more applications are having machine learning models applied to them to give us better recommendations, to complete things for us, to figure out inferencing and all sorts of kind of crazy, amazing stuff. But the challenge is, we have these wonderful data scientists, these incredibly smart data scientists, but getting beyond just building models into something that becomes usable, sometimes it's hard. Sometimes it's too hard. And today we're going to have a chance to sort of dig in and sort of talk about that, and also talk about it with some folks that are trying to make it simpler and really trying to make it much, much easier. So very excited today to have Tuin Srivastavan, who is co-founder and CEO of Baseten. Tuin, welcome to the show. Great to have you on.
Thanks, Brian. Really nice to be on the show as well.
You have a really interesting background, both in terms of data science and having been at companies that are both building and using this, but also now you started Baseten. You guys have been around for a couple of years. Give us a little bit of your background, not only around data science, ML, but also kind of what got you started, what motivated you to start the company.
Yeah, thanks. Love to do that. So, we started the company about 2 years ago, but I've actually been doing, about 3 years ago actually, but I've actually been doing machine learning in all shapes and forms for about a decade now. So started off actually being a pretty miserable investment banker in 2010, and decided that wasn't for me, and went and joined a research lab in Boston, where I was kind of exposed to machine learning for the first time, and we were trying to use machine learning in pretty basic forms of machine learning, so random forest and pretty basic logistic regressions, to figure out if folks had ALS using non-invasive biomarkers, and trying to figure out if we could not only diagnose them, but also give them some prediction about how their disease would evolve over time. Did a bunch of publishing there and ended up working in a small startup that was being spun out to commercialize that technology. And then from there, I decided that that was in Boston, that I needed to move to San Francisco, because that's where, at the time, a lot of cool stuff was happening, and joined a a small company conglomerate and ended up doing lots of content moderation and fraud detection work with machine learning. And all the while we were doing this, like, it was very much early in, how convinced organizations were that machine learning was going to work for you. And so ended up becoming full stack engineers alongside being data scientists. I can talk a bit about that. But between the experience, I started another company using in analytics and using applied machine learning for operational data. After selling the company in 2018, we decided to start Baseten. And really our goal when we started Baseten was, hey, we believe that machine learning is going to be big. We're starting to see more and more use cases pop up. But for all we can tell, most organizations still haven't been successful in figuring out how to make machine learning work for them and actually, having it power some business process or plug into some business process. So we end up doing a bunch of research around, why that was. And, there's really there were a bunch of reasons. A lot of folks didn't have clean data. A lot of people couldn't find the right talent. But one thing that stuck out to us was how much teams were underestimating how much work went in to going from I have a machine learning model trained on some data to I have a machine learning model that is being plugged into the business or is powering some business process or has been productized in some form. And that's really why we started Baseten, which was that we realized that there was a lot of work that needs to be done once you have a machine learning model to get that model working for you and working for the business, and trying to figure out, hey, we did this in our previous life at companies by learning that engineering skill set. Could we productize that same skill set for other folks?
Yeah. Yeah. We sort of always love talking to founders and startups who, have built the technology sort of based on their own, their own sort of lived pain or shared pain. It's not just, I thought that space would be interesting, or, I studied something in college. You guys sort of lived with this, and, essentially we're like, there's an opportunity. If we live through that pain, there's probably a whole bunch of us like that. And they're very, very cool. Let's talk a little bit about that sort of data scientist challenge, that pain, the thing that you ran into, which is, you were building models, but you then had to be sort of a full stack developer. Like, why did those two things come together? Was it, like people couldn't use the models if they weren't your peers, like they were, colleagues in business units? Like what sort of drove that, or what, what is the pain that the developers are feeling that you are trying to sort of focus in on?
Yeah, it's a good question. So, like what is, like, a model is really like it's some artifact that sits in the Jupyter notebook somewhere or on some machine somewhere. Oftentimes the inputs to that model and the outputs to the model aren't human interpretable. They may not even be accessible outside of that code. These artifacts can be very, very big. So, if you look at models being produced today around like large language models, they can have hundreds of billions of parameters that need to be serialized in some ways. Most models aren't that big. But really what needs to happen is that model needs to go somewhere, and it has to be made callable either in some programmatic way, so be put behind an API, or either in some UI, so that someone else, or like a business user, as you said. So let's say you are building a lead scoring machine learning model based on historic sales data and your current pipeline. You need to create some UI for the sales folks to be able to consume that. In both those cases, so this needs to be put behind an API, or this has to be exposed in some application form. There's so much more than just I trained a model. So you need to deploy that model, and what that means is really putting it behind an API so it can be called for something else. You need to write some business logic before and after that model. So a model, will often be trained on a bunch of kind of like human uninterpretable, some features that are uninterpretable to humans, and they will output maybe a score between 0 and 1, and that needs to be normalized and translated back into something that the business can read, then written back to some third party. or in the last case, someone needs to build some UI to interact with that model that you may have deployed just now. All these things we're talking about is like a very, very different skill set from what a typical machine learning engineer or data scientist has. So a data scientist and machine learning engineer will come from a very quantitative background. They have some training in statistics, maybe some rudimentary engineering skills. But to deploy the model, you'll need a bunch of infrastructure and DevOps experience. To build that business logic, you'll need some backend experience. To build that UI, you'll need some front-end experience. And all these skills are things that typically data scientists don't have.
Right. Yeah. And I think about this in sort of two ways. I used to, I still do a certain amount of work with things like Kubernetes, and we would talk about it being, great infrastructure for data scientists and these sort of scalable models. But yeah, we would have to talk through going like, well, first you have to set up Kubernetes, and then you have to set up these pipelines that allow you to bring in, and it was like all this work, and you were like, all right, we still haven't run the model. We still haven't, so none of that happened. And then I think about like my regular day to day, like you said, you could be interacting with, sales teams talking about leads, or marketing groups trying to, qualify whatever. And what always happens is you start off with like, boy, it'd be great to know this, right? Some sort of data, some sort of whatever. As a data scientist, you have the ability to go out and find that. And then what ultimately happens is people go, oh, wow, that's great. Can you now integrate it with this system and make it do something downstream, and then make it, consistently update that stuff so that's going on? Like it feels like the model itself is really important, but there's so much either on the front end of building stuff, or on the back end of making it be part of, like you said, things that humans interact with. That's an incredible amount of work that, data scientists probably are like, dude, that's not my job. Like, but if that's how they're going to get measured for success, it makes things really difficult for them.
Totally.
They're Python developers. They're not Java developers or whatever else they do.
I think that's exactly it, which is just that, it's an odd profession in a way, in that a lot of these folks look like, including myself at that point, like they look like engineers from the outside, or software engineers from the outside. But it's like a very, very different type of skill set that shouldn't be undermined by making them, go and learn Kubernetes, which I don't, as you said, you do a bunch of work with it, but not everyone necessarily needs to go and learn those things.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about, that problem space that we've been sort of, talking about here. Let's talk about what Baseten attempts to, try and solve, to make easier, to make more efficient for the business and so forth. It's a pretty compelling system, just watching it, but kind of walk me through how you guys think about what you're solving.
Totally. So like, as I said to you, there's three pillars to Baseten that I kind of told through earlier, and that's really how we think about the product. So the first one is model deployment, and the simple user story there is, I have a model sitting in my notebook somewhere, or on some machine somewhere. I need to get it behind an API, or I need to get it in my Airflow, running in my Airflow. But really, the idea there is that how do we getting your model behind some service so that the API accessible? I think and so that's our first pillar. The second pillar really is the idea of like a serverless backend that can interact with that model. Again, most data scientists who are working in industry end up building Flask apps. We're trying to make it so they don't have to. They can deploy their model, and if they want to write some pre-processing logic and post-processing logic, they can do that in Baseten without kind of standing up a service in AWS. With this backend, the serverless backend that we provide users, or we give users access to, we're trying to like give them all those nooks and crannies that we know you'll need for application building. So, do you need cron? We give you a way to set up cron very easily. Do you need another Postgres database that you may need to read and write data from? We give you access to that. Do you need to run these? Do you need to have these this serverless code triggered by some Kafka stream? We give an integration to Kafka. And so really we're trying to take care of kind of all those common user stories that we see around standing up these backends. The third pillar is the front end. And so, you've deployed your model, you've built a backend around it, exposed behind the API. We give you a drag and drop front end to allow you to build kind of interfaces to interact with that backend that you've put together. One thing that we believe is that when all three of these things exist in the same system, the integration pain points disappear and we unlock just a lot of speed, so that you don't have to configure an API endpoint when you want to trigger, when you want to click a button, because we already know what you want to do there. So we try to get rid of a lot of that pain that as developers we've run into time and time again.
Yeah. I mean, it as I was sort of watching it and digging into it, it very much feels like, you guys allowed developers or, data scientists to focus on what they're paid to focus on, build models, train models, refine models. And then essentially you create this, sort of low code / serverless framework around it, but under the covers, it exposes this really powerful stuff. It's PyTorch, it's Kubeflow, it's all these sort of, the technologies that are like, that's going to make you really powerful. It's not sort of tinker toys and stuff.
Exactly. And I think like the technologies we've chosen behind the scenes are the ones that, will hopefully scale with you as a user as well.
Yeah. And what are some of those technologies that are, either under the sea, kind of under the covers, or the things that you expose to people so that, the system is easy to use?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So a lot of the work we do is with Kubernetes, obviously in the background. But really, like, when it comes to our user, what we try to say is that you only need to know Python, and you only need to care about the stuff you're doing in your Jupyter notebook. So all you need to manage is your requirements.txt and your Python code, and your model artifacts. And once you give them to us, we take care of all that infrastructure that you would have to stand up otherwise. So that's, when you give us the requirements.txt and code, we go and stand up a machine somewhere, on the interwebs, and we take care of all that Kubernetes infrastructure for you, for ML model deployment. We take care of kind of load balancing that, the request for that model. And really all the user needs to think about is their code, their packages that they need. And Baseten is, we've built auto scaling in the back end, so users don't have to. We've built stuff like GPU support for models, so you don't have to. And really, the goal for us is to try to hide a lot of that kind of gnarly DevOps stuff that comes with kind of big, large-scale Kubernetes systems away from our users, and really allow them to focus on what we think they're good at.
Yeah, walk me through a little bit how there's a great demonstration on your website. It's 2 minutes. It's worth people's time, but kind of walk me through normal process. How does a typical developer get from, I have this model, I like the model, I want to expose it in an API, an application, to I can now make this usable to this business analyst or sales leader or whoever? I guess what the process I'm trying to understand is how much do they have to then think about okay, they want this step and expose this API and how do you guys think about that?
Yeah, totally. So everything for us starts with, we take a pretty model-centric view of the world. So everything starts with a model in a Jupyter notebook or somewhere on some machine. There's a Baseten CLI that users can download and clone, can install into their Python environment. And once they do that, they basically expose to a number of different deployment methods for their models. And, under the hood, all these things are doing the same things. They're kind of just different levels of complexity depending on how the user's own model is structured. So they call Baseten.deploy model. They pass the model artifact. They give it a name. And then what we've done there, then in a few minutes, you end up with an API endpoint ready to go to call that model. From there, you can the user will be able to kind of go to the Baseten web app, and we've built this pretty interactive, immersive web Python environment where they can write that Python code that goes before and after that model. Once they do that, they don't have to think about how do I set up an API endpoint, because we've already done that for you. So you'll be able to see instructions on how to use that API around authentication, how to call it. Or from there, you can go into the drag and drop view builder, which looks very much like one of the many application builders that exist today, with the big exception being that it's a bit more machine learning centric, and it's got a native integration to this backend that we just described.
Interesting. Very, very cool. Yeah. And again, sort of watching it get built and sort of the simplicity around it is super powerful. I'm curious, obviously, you guys have been not only building the company, but had early customers. Like, are you seeing kind of early patterns of the types of applications people are building? Are there things that, are the, I don't want to say the hello world, but like the most common things, or has it sort of surprised you at sort of the breadth of what people have been building?
Yeah, I think that's kind of like the beauty of building like horizontal software. That's the beauty of building horizontal software, is that people just start building random things. So, we've had stuff from, Patreon, companies like Patreon building content moderation work, to a company called Pipe doing underwriting and workflows, all the way to, crypto companies building kind of like crypto consultancies, building like models for their clients, all the way to like, there's a guy right now who's building his healthcare startup, or like the V0 of his healthcare startup on Baseten, to serve hospitals in India with some clinical diagnoses based on some model he's built. And that's, to me, it's like so amazing, just like seeing everything from, this really like super niche long tail of customers who really just don't have access to this work, to these building blocks today, all the way to big companies that are using it for core workflows within their organizations.
Very cool. Very, very cool. Yeah, it's it is. It's one of those things like, sometimes these applications get built and they seem sometimes like a one-off, and then you realize like the impact they have on, we were hearing stories of stuff getting built during COVID as to how, data was being shared to, analyze breakouts and stuff like that. Yeah. Or you hear about how diseases are, they're resolving them 50% faster. Like it's super, super powerful and kind of amazing in and of itself. I want to be conscious of your time. You're running a company, and you're returning from a long flight. Real quick, what's the best way for folks to either engage with the service, or if they want to get in touch with your team, pick your team's brain about stuff? What's the best way to engage with Baseten, starting or growing, however that might be?
Yeah, anyone can actually sign up on Baseten today and start using it. If you have any issues, of course, feel free to reach out to me directly at tuin@baseten.co, or just chat within the app. I'm always also really happy to talk to folks who, are stuck, or, machine learning is hard. And if there's anything at all that I or the team could be helpful with, please feel free to reach out.
Okay, good stuff. Tuin, thank you for the time today, and especially thank you for, you as we talked about before, you're returning from a very, very, very long trip and probably a little bit jet lagged, but it was great to not only learn about the company, learn about your background, but also kind of see the evolution of how it's becoming much easier to build these ML apps and make them useful for the business. So, folks, with that, I want to, on behalf of Aaron and I want to thank Tuin for his time today. I want to thank all of you for listening week in and week out. Thanks for telling a friend and sharing the show with people and helping us grow the community. So with that, I'm going to wrap it up, and we'll talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to The Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.